Hi there everybody, this is David. I'm finally back from my vacation and I'm coming to y'all with some really freaking good news because Square Enix is pondering a turn-based future for the Final Fantasy series. And I want to tell you all about it in 3 different articles that we're going to be going over today because there's a lot to cover here. And I definitely do think that's worth a sub. So be sure to hit that subscribe button and the like button to join my party and come on with me and level up with me. So we have some quotes here from a couple of people, most notably the Baldur's Gate 3 publishing director is saying that with Clear Obscure Expedition 33 in the rear view mirror, he's saying a turn-based Final Fantasy could sell well over 10 million copies because there is clearly the audience for it. We know that Final Fantasy 16 didn't sell all that well, and we know that a whole bunch of turn-based RPGs are selling like hotcakes. So it only makes sense for Square Enix to do what they've been doing lately, what they've been doing best, which is going back to the basics and doing the same thing with the Final Fantasy series. They've been going back to the basics with Saga. They've been going back to the basics with Dragon Quest. They've been going back to the basics with Star Ocean, with their turn-based strategy RPGs like Triangle Strategy and Tactics Ogre and the upcoming Final Fantasy Tactics. They're going back to the basics. But Final Fantasy seems to be the one outlier that they don't want to rein in and bring back to the basics. The last turn-based RPG that we got in the Final Fantasy series was in 2000. I was in college, for God's sakes, whenever Final Fantasy X came out. That was 25 freaking years ago. So I think it's high time that Final Fantasy kind of goes back to its roots. So he goes on to say, this is straight out of the Baldur's Gate 3 publisher's director's mouth. He says, I've been playing a lot of OG Final Fantasy, and look, I'm not trying to tell anybody what they should or shouldn't like, but there's clearly the audience and the desire for a more traditional Final Fantasy experience. So much of an audience, in fact, that I think that there's at least 10 million units in it, and it'll be less expensive with higher sales potential. Well, that will make all the suits in the office very happy. Less expensive, more sales? Where do I sign up? I think a genuinely 90 Metacritic turn-based Final Fantasy with an excellent original story and characters could pull in between 9 and 15 million in sales. You can make the combat system more dynamic, as has been done, and he goes on to say, that said, the desire to build must lay with the developers themselves. Should all Final Fantasy games be turn-based? No. I'm just saying that if you want to make a lot of money and bring back the core heart of the franchise, now is a good time to do so. This guy is right. He's speaking truth to power. He is spitting facts right here. He then goes on to say that the recent Clear Obscure Expedition 33 is a perfect example of how a game in this genre can defy sales expectations. This is unsurprising considering the French JRPG had everyone crossing their fingers for another traditional Final Fantasy. The discourse here even reached Final Fantasy XIV leads Yoshi P, who then went on to say that the jury is still out on whether Final Fantasy XVII will go back to turn-based or not. So let's take a look at that article where Yoshi P had an interview with the Anime News Network, and he was asked there and said, is Final Fantasy going to go back to its turn-based roots? What is going on here? And according to Yoshi P, he says, that question has too narrow a scope. Yoshi P says, with this question of turn-based versus action, it tends to isolate the gameplay to just the battle system. That doesn't take into account what kind of game the creators want to deliver to the players. So he's kind of saying, yeah, the sales would be good, but what do the developers want? Okay? He goes on to say that the game's battle mechanics is one that's determined in concert with the gradual production of its visual style, narrative, and other game systems. It's not a clear-cut answer, whether it will all become turn-based or if it's going to become more action-based. Then he says, I'm not necessarily going to be on the Final Fantasy 17 team, so we don't want to obstruct or limit our future director or whoever will be producing games like 17 or 18. We don't want to put them onto a rail. So he again is saying that is up to the developers. I'm not going to force them to do it or anything else like that, but Now, we have an analyst, a sales analyst, also chiming in who says, it's never ending here. Square Enix has probably kicked themselves seeing the success of realistic turn-based JRPGs such as Clear Obscure Expedition 33, after being reticent to do it with the Final Fantasy series. So they go on to say, you know, Expedition 33's success has to do with its great characters, its great combat, and its, you know, $50 price tag. That definitely helps things out. But the analyst goes on to say that there's also an opening for a modern, realistic-looking JRPG with a traditional battle system, which is, you know, the God's honest truth. We see a lot of turn-based RPGs, whether the Dragon Quest series or Persona or Metaphor or whatever, but they're all very cartoony, and I will be the first to say I love a good cartoony game. I love it, but a lot of them aren't, you know, the most realistic looking things. Then comes in Clear Obscure, which is realistic and it does have a turn-based combat system. So Yoshi P said back in 2022, whenever he was making Final Fantasy 16, he says that he understands the appeal of turn-based combat. You know, after all, he was brought up with turn-based combat just like the fans are, but he also believed that action-based battles were a far better fit for games with realistic graphics. And I quote, this is straight out of Yoshi P's mouth. One thing that we found recently is that as graphics get better and better, and as characters become more realistic and more photorealistic, is that the combination of realism with the very unreal sense of turn-based commands doesn't really fit together. You have this kind of like strange gap that emerges. So that was his way of saying like, oh, you can't have a realistic turn-based game. It just doesn't make sense. Well, we know that, he be wrong. It does make sense. Also, we also know that historically, in the game industry, just in general, like there's this kind of overwhelming feeling that if a game is action-based, it's just going to sell a whole lot better than a turn-based one. There's this kind of bias against turn-based RPGs, much to my chagrin. But we know that Baldur's Gate 3, as well as Expedition 33, came in and kind of proved that wrong. And according to the same analyst, he says that Expedition 33 sales are measuring up more than favorably against Metaphor ReFantazio, which is the biggest turn-based RPG that came out in recent memory. So yeah, this brand new game from this brand new studio that nobody ever heard of is doing better than freaking Atlas, you know? Like that is a whole lot. So I want to know from y'all, what do you think about this news? Do you think that Square Enix is going to take Final Fantasy back to the basics, like they did successfully with every single one of their other titles? Personally, I do. I hope so, because we also know that old school games are selling well too. The Lunar Collection, the Suikoden Collection, the Grandia Collection, Trails in the Sky is getting remade. We have Dragon Quest 3, which sold like hotcakes. It was their best-selling console game of last year. Romancing Saga 2 Remake. All these old school games are selling. People want these games, but we also want Final Fantasy to go back to old school as well, and to just, you know, dip it into the turn-based pool. See what happens. See how the fans respond. What have you got to lose, Square? You might as well give it a shot. So yeah, I want to hear from y'all. What do you think about this news? Are you excited about it? Do you want it to go action? Do you want it to go turn-based? Do you want to do something else entirely? Do you want a strategy Final Fantasy? Who knows? Let me know in the comments, and as always, have a good day.